2 years had passed since the dramatic events in the Senate chamber of Vex Prime. The Institute for Interspecies Understanding had grown far beyond what Marcus and Kira had initially envisioned. What had started as a single facility on a neutral orbital station had expanded to include research centers, educational programs, and cultural exchange initiatives that spanned multiple worlds. Marcus stood in his office at the main institute, reviewing reports on the latest collaborative projects. One report detailed a joint human-Vex agricultural research program that was developing new crops that could flourish on both human and Vex worlds. Another outlined a medical research initiative where human doctors and Vex healers were sharing techniques and knowledge, saving lives on both sides. A third discussed an educational exchange program where young humans and Vex were learning each other's languages and histories directly from each other. The work was deeply fulfilling, but it was also exhausting. Marcus had discovered that building peace was far more difficult than his military career had ever been. In combat, the objectives were clear and the enemy was defined. In peace building, everything was ambiguous and complicated. There were always setbacks, always people on both sides who remained skeptical or hostile toward the growing cooperation between the two species. Kira entered the office, carrying a data tablet filled with information about a new proposal. She had just returned from Vex Prime, where she had been meeting with the new military leadership about a joint defense initiative. The old warrior culture of the Vex was slowly transforming, shifting toward a focus on protecting their territory and their allies, rather than on endless conquest and expansion. The Vex leadership has approved the proposal, Kira said, settling into a chair across from Marcus. They're willing to establish a joint command center where human and Vex military officers will coordinate defense strategy together. It's limited in scope for now, but it's a significant step forward. Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of cautious optimism. These were small victories, but they were victories nonetheless. Each one represented another brick in the foundation of lasting peace. "How is your father?" Marcus asked. Supreme Commander Thorn had stepped back from day-to-day governance but remained an advisor to the current Vex leadership. "He's well," Kira replied. "He wanted me to give you a message. He said that watching what you and I have built together has changed his perspective on what his people could become. He said that for generations the Vex defined themselves by their strength in combat. But now he's beginning to believe that true strength might be something different." Marcus felt something shift inside him. He had been uncertain when he first came to Vex Prime, uncertain whether what he and Kira had accomplished would be enough to prevent war. But hearing that even Supreme Commander Thorn, one of the most powerful and traditional figures in Vex society, was beginning to see things differently, gave him hope. That evening, Marcus and Kira attended a reception at the Institute that was hosting both human and Vex scientists and cultural representatives. The event had become a regular occurrence. These gatherings where members of both species could interact in a social setting, building relationships that went beyond their official roles and responsibilities. Marcus observed the interactions around him with a sense of quiet satisfaction. A human biologist was having an animated conversation with a Vex healer about comparative anatomy. A group of young humans and Vex were laughing together, their cultural differences seeming to enhance rather than hinder their friendship. An elderly human man was teaching a Vex woman about human music, while a Vex artist was showing a human colleague samples of crystalline art that took the viewer's breath away. These moments, Marcus realized, were what the peace was truly built upon. Not treaties or agreements, but the thousands of small connections between individuals who were learning to see each other as people, rather than as aliens or enemies. Later that night, as Marcus and Kira returned to their quarters, they received urgent communication. There was a problem on one of the human colony worlds. A group of human extremists had clashed with Vex traders, claiming that the Vex were attempting to steal human resources and intellectual property. The situation had escalated and there were reports of violence. Marcus felt a chill run through him. This was exactly the kind of incident that General Tavik had tried to create deliberately, except this time it appeared to be spontaneous. Or was it? "We need to investigate this ourselves," Marcus said immediately. "We need to understand what really happened before either government can use this incident to justify breaking the peace treaty." Kira nodded. She understood the danger. She had seen firsthand how quickly misunderstanding and distrust could spiral into something catastrophic. They began making arrangements to travel to the colony world immediately. On the journey, they discussed what they might face. The peace they had built was still fragile, still dependent on the commitment of leadership figures on both sides, and on the continued efforts of the Institute to maintain dialogue and understanding. One incident, if mishandled, could unravel years of progress. When they arrived at the colony, they discovered that the situation was complex but not catastrophic. Human colonists had accused Vex traders of taking more than they had paid for in a trade agreement. The Vex traders, not understanding human concepts of property and ownership the way humans did, had genuinely believed they were engaging in the transaction correctly. The misunderstanding had led to heated arguments, which had led to physical confrontation, which had attracted attention from more aggressive individuals on both sides, but what could have been a tragedy was prevented by the presence of people on the colony who had received training through the Institute's educational programs, a human administrator and a Vex liaison officer, both of whom had studied at the Institute, had worked together to prevent the situation from escalating further. They had managed to separate the conflicting parties and create a space for dialogue. When Marcus and Kira arrived, these two individuals explained what had happened. They expressed their frustration that despite all the progress that had been made, there were still people on both sides who seemed determined to see the peace fail. The misunderstanding was honest, the human administrator said, but the violence wasn't. There were people waiting for an opportunity like this, people who wanted an excuse to prove that peace between our species was impossible. What did you do? Kira asked. We used the conflict resolution protocols that we learned at the Institute, the Vex liaison officer replied. We brought both parties into a structured dialogue. We had them explain what they believed had happened and what they had intended. When they heard each other's perspectives, they understood the misunderstanding. Most of them wanted to resolve it peacefully once they understood what had actually occurred. Marcus and Kira spent the next several days on the colony, working with local leaders to ensure that the situation was fully resolved and that relationships could be rebuilt. They also investigated who had been behind the escalation of violence, the individuals who had deliberately tried to turn an honest misunderstanding into a major international incident. What they discovered disturbed them. There were still networks of people on both sides who opposed the peace and who were actively working to sabotage it. Some were old allies of General Tavik who had escaped justice. Others were human extremists who had never accepted the peace treaty. They had been watching for any opportunity to create an incident that would give them justification for resuming conflict. Marcus realized that the peace was not something that had been won and secured. The peace was something that had to be actively maintained and defended against those who still believed in endless war. The treaty and the governing structures were important, but they were not enough. What truly sustained the peace were people like the human administrator and the Vex liaison officer, individuals who had internalized the values of understanding and cooperation, and who made those values real in their daily lives. Before they left the colony, Marcus and Kira met with the two officials who had prevented the situation from becoming worse. They offered them positions at the Institute, opportunities to deepen their training and to eventually teach others what they had learned. The peace we've built is fragile, Marcus said to them. It's not fragile because the idea of peace is weak. It's fragile because there are people who want it to fail. People like you. People who understand both species and who are committed to finding solutions rather than creating conflict, are what keeps the peace alive. The human administrator and the Vex liaison officer both accepted the offer. They understood the importance of what Marcus and Kira were trying to accomplish. They also understood something that had become clear to everyone involved in building peace. Peace was not a destination that you reached and then forgot about. Peace was a continuous process, a commitment that had to be renewed every single day through the choices and actions of millions of people. As Marcus and Kira returned to the Institute, they reflected on how much had changed in just 2 years and how much still needed to change. The hard work was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But they also knew that they were not alone in this work. The ceremonial combat arena was prepared quickly within the Grand Senate chamber. The gathered officials and guards formed a wide circle, creating a space where the battle would take place. Marcus was given a standard military blade, a weapon of Vex design that was heavier and less elegant than human weapons, but still functional in skilled hands. General Tavik entered the arena shirtless, his crystalline exoskeleton fully exposed, bearing the scars of his many battles. Kira watched from the gallery, her large eyes filled with fear and hope intertwined together. She had encouraged Marcus to challenge Tavik, but now, seeing the size and power of her people's greatest warrior, doubt crept into her mind. What if Marcus had made a terrible mistake? What if his courage was not enough? Marcus tried to calm his breathing. He had fought before. He had been trained in combat his entire military career. But he had never fought anyone like General Tavik. The Vex warrior was nearly 2 meters tall, possessed of crystalline strength that made human muscle seem fragile by comparison, and had decades of experience in hand-to-hand combat. The Supreme Commander raised his hand, signaling the beginning of the combat. General Tavik charged forward, his blade raised above his head. His movement was fast and powerful, a direct attack designed to overwhelm Marcus with brute force. But Marcus did not try to match Tavik's strength. Instead, he rolled to the side, using the momentum of his smaller, lighter frame to move quickly out of the path of the attack. Tavik's blade struck the stone floor of the arena where Marcus had been standing just moments before. The crowd gasped. This was not the kind of combat they expected. Tavik attacked with fierce determination, driving Marcus backward across the arena. Each blow from Tavik's blade was powerful enough to crush bone, and Marcus knew that one clean hit would be catastrophic. So he did not try to block. Instead, he dodged and weaved, using his human agility and unpredictability to stay just beyond reach. Tavik became frustrated. He was accustomed to opponents who tried to match his strength, who stood their ground and fought warrior to warrior. But Marcus moved like water, flowing around attacks rather than resisting them. The general began to make mistakes, swinging too hard, overextending, his breath coming harder as he expended energy chasing an opponent who refused to meet him head-on. After several minutes of intense combat, Marcus saw his opportunity. Tavik had left himself exposed after a powerful overhead strike. Marcus moved in quickly, not to attack but to disarm. He struck Tavik's wrist with precision, and the general's blade fell from his hand. Before Tavik could recover, Marcus had his own blade positioned at the general's throat. The Senate chamber fell completely silent. Everyone expected Marcus to deliver the killing blow. That was what Tavik would have done. That was what ancient Vex law allowed. But Marcus lowered his weapon. "I will not kill you," Marcus said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "I defeat you, but I choose mercy. That is what humans bring to this conflict. That is what we offer. Not conquest, not dominance, but the choice to show restraint even when we have the power to take everything." He stepped back, giving Tavik space to stand. The Vex general rose to his feet, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. He had been defeated, and his defeater had chosen not to kill him. It was in that moment that something shifted in the consciousness of everyone watching. They saw a human, from a species they had been taught to view as inferior, show a strength that transcended mere physical power. They saw a warrior who could kill but chose not to. They saw the possibility of something different, something better than endless cycles of revenge and death. But the moment of understanding was interrupted when Tavik's loyal officers suddenly moved. They had hidden throughout the chamber, ready for this moment. Nearly 47 Vex warriors emerged from concealed positions around the arena, their weapons drawn, their intention clear. They moved to defend their general and to attack Marcus, who now stood alone in the center of the chamber. Kira rose to her feet, watching in horror as the warriors surrounded her husband. Supreme Commander Thorn stood as well, his hand raised to command his own guards to intervene. But before he could act, Marcus held up his hand. "Wait," Marcus called out. "This is still part of the ancient law. I defeated General Tavik in single combat. He has challenged that by summoning aid. That breaks his honor and proves his corruption. All of you who have come to fight on his behalf, you are all complicit in his conspiracy." The warriors paused, confused. They looked to Tavik for guidance, and the general, understanding that his gamble had failed, made a desperate decision. He ordered his warriors to attack anyway. Honor be damned. His only option now was to overwhelm Marcus through sheer numbers and eliminate him before the Senate could act. What happened next was extraordinary. Marcus moved through the 47 warriors with a grace and tactical brilliance that seemed almost impossible. He did not fight to kill. He fought to disable, to incapacitate, to render his opponents unable to continue fighting. He used the chamber's architecture to his advantage, forcing the warriors into bottlenecks where only a few could attack him at once. He moved with an economy of motion that seemed to defy the chaos around him. Each warrior he faced fell knowing they had been defeated by someone who could have killed them, but chose not to. The combat lasted nearly 20 minutes, and by the end, all 47 warriors lay on the ground, exhausted and defeated but alive. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily, his human body bloodied and bruised but still standing. He looked directly at Supreme Commander Thorn and spoke. "This is what peace looks like," he said. "I have defeated everyone who opposed it. I have shown that I am strong enough to kill and wise enough not to." General Tavek started this conspiracy because he believed that strength and cruelty were the same thing. But they are not. True strength is the choice to show mercy. The chamber was utterly silent. Everyone understood what they had witnessed. A human had defeated Tavek and his entire force, not through technological superiority or numbers, but through superior tactical thinking, adaptability, and most importantly, through choosing mercy over vengeance. Supreme Commander Thorn walked down into the arena and stood beside Marcus. He looked at his daughter, who had come to stand with her husband, and then he looked back at the assembled Senate. "General Tavek is a traitor to the Vex Empire," Thorn declared. "His conspiracy against the peace treaty is now fully exposed. He will be taken into custody and tried for his crimes. All those who participated in his conspiracy will face justice. But more importantly, we now understand what the peace treaty truly means. It means strength enough to choose a better path." Over the following weeks, the full extent of the conspiracy unraveled. General Tavek and his allies were tried and convicted. Colonel David Graves and the human military officers involved in the conspiracy were also arrested and would face human justice. The investigation revealed the financial networks and corrupting influences that had been driving both sides toward continued conflict. Kira was formally appointed as the Vex Ambassador to Humanity, a position of tremendous honor and authority. Supreme Commander Thorn became a vocal advocate within the Vex military for restructuring their civilization, away from endless expansion and toward legitimate defense and peaceful coexistence. Marcus and Kira established the Institute for Interspecies Understanding on a neutral world, a place where humans and Vex could work together to study each other's cultures and find ways to prevent future conflicts. The Institute became a beacon of hope, drawing the most brilliant minds from both civilizations who wanted to build something better than war. One evening, Marcus and Kira stood together on a balcony overlooking a new orbital station being constructed jointly by humans and Vex engineers. They watched as members of both species worked side by side, their cooperation building something new and hopeful. "Do you regret coming back here?" Marcus asked, referring to the danger they had faced on Vex Prime. Kira shook her head. "No," she said. "I came back to save my people, but I also learned something important. The people we were trying to save were never our enemies. Our real enemy was fear and the people who profit from it." Marcus took his wife's hand and they stood together watching the future being built. They had married for peace, and in doing so, they had discovered something far more valuable. They had discovered that peace was not just the absence of war. Peace was the presence of connection, the choice to see the best in others even when it would be easier to see the worst, and the strength to build something beautiful together. The station around them stood as a testament to what was possible when two different species chose to trust each other, when they chose to see each other not as enemies but as partners in creating a better future for both their peoples. The Grand Senate Chamber of Vex Prime was a massive structure, carved from living crystalline material that had been shaped over centuries to create an impressive space where the most important decisions of the Vex civilization were made. Tall pillars stretched from floor to ceiling. The chamber could hold hundreds of officials, warriors, and observers. In the center, elevated above everyone else, sat the seats of the Supreme Commander and the High Council. Balak led Marcus and Kira through a service entrance early in the morning, using her ministry credentials to pass through the security checkpoints. They moved quickly, keeping their heads down, trying to blend in with the other officials and staff members who were arriving for the meeting. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest. One mistake, one guard taking a closer look at their false identification documents, and everything would be over. They reached a viewing gallery on the upper level of the chamber, a place where observers could watch the Senate proceedings without being on the main floor. Balak positioned them behind a pillar where they would be partially hidden from view, but could still see and hear everything that happened below. Within the hour, the chamber began to fill with Vex officials and military leaders. The crystalline seats glowed with soft light as more and more people took their places. The atmosphere in the chamber was tense. There was clearly something significant about this particular session, something that had drawn more attendees than usual. Supreme Commander Thorn entered the chamber, and the room seemed to shift. He was a powerful figure, tall even by Vex standards, with scars on his crystalline body that marked his long history as a warrior and leader. His presence commanded respect, but Marcus could see something in his bearing that troubled him. The Supreme Commander looked uncertain. He looked burdened. General Tavik was close behind him, whispering something into his ear. The session began with routine matters of state and military readiness reports. But within minutes, General Tavik rose and demanded to speak. His voice echoed through the chamber, and everyone fell silent to listen to what the powerful general had to say. "Supreme Commander, honored members of the Senate," Tavik said, his voice strong and commanding. "I come before you today to warn you of a threat that has infiltrated our civilization. The human race is not interested in peace. They are interested in conquest. The treaty that was supposed to protect us has instead weakened us. While we have redirected our military resources towards civilian needs, the humans have been preparing for invasion. The female diplomat who was married to a human is not an ambassador for peace. She is a traitor and a spy." Gasps and angry murmurs filled the chamber. Supreme Commander Thorn looked distressed, clearly troubled by Tavik's words but also seemingly unsure how to respond. Marcus felt Kira tense beside him. She started to stand to call out, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm, holding her back. Not yet. They needed to let Tavik finish, to let him fully expose the depth of his conspiracy before they made their move. Tavik continued his speech, outlining what he claimed was clear evidence of human deception. He spoke about the assassination attempt on Kira as proof that humans could not be trusted. He spoke about unusual human military movements and claimed they were evidence of preparation for invasion. Every word was carefully crafted to sound truthful, to appeal to the fears and pride of the Vex people. "I propose," Tavik said, drawing his speech to a close, "that we immediately mobilize our military forces for a preemptive strike against human territory. We must act now before it is too late. We must show the humans that we are not weak, that we will not be deceived." The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Some Vex officials stood in support of Tavik's position. Others looked uncertain and troubled. Supreme Commander Thorn sat silently, his face unreadable. This was the moment. Marcus knew it. They had to act now, before Tavik could consolidate his control over the Senate. He turned to Kira and nodded. She understood what had to be done. Kira stood and stepped out from behind the pillar. She began walking down the stairs that led from the observation gallery toward the main floor of the chamber. The moment she appeared, the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. "Father," she called out, her voice clear and steady as she descended the stairs. "Members of the Senate, I am here to tell you the truth." General Tavik's face went pale with shock. He had not expected this. No one had expected this. Supreme Commander Thorn stood to his feet, confusion and concern warring on his face. "Kira, what is the meaning of this?" "General Tavik has lied to you," Kira said, reaching the main floor of the chamber. "He has conspired with human extremists to create an incident that would reignite the war. He did this because war is profitable for those in power. War is where General Tavik draws his strength and influence." Guards began moving toward her, but Thorn raised his hand to stop them. He wanted to hear what his daughter had to say. "The assassination attempt was orchestrated by Tavik's own operatives working with corrupt human military officers," Kira continued. "They wanted to create an incident that would make both sides distrust each other. And if they had succeeded, if I had been killed, they would have had exactly what they needed to plunge both civilizations back into conflict." Tavik stood up, his voice booming through the chamber. "She has been corrupted by her human husband. She is speaking lies. These are the words of someone who has abandoned her people." "No," Kira said, turning to face him directly. "These are the words of someone who loves her people so much that she is willing to risk everything to save them from the mistake you are trying to force them to make." At that moment, Marcus emerged from behind the pillar and descended the stairs. His appearance sent another shockwave through the chamber. A human here in the sacred Senate chamber of Vex Prime. It was unprecedented and deeply controversial. Marcus walked down to stand beside Kira, and she took his hand. The gesture was simple but powerful. It was a statement of unity, of partnership, of the commitment they shared to preventing war. "I have evidence," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "Communications between General Tavik and Colonel David Graves, a human military officer who opposes the peace treaty. They have been coordinating their efforts to create an incident that would convince both our peoples that peace is impossible." Valek, still standing in the observation gallery, activated a secure transmission that sent the encrypted communications and intercepted messages directly to the Senate's main viewing systems. The evidence appeared on large screens throughout the chamber for everyone to see. The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards moved forward, but Supreme Commander Thorne again commanded them to stop. He was looking at the evidence, his expression growing darker as he understood the depth of the conspiracy that had been orchestrated against his people and against the peace that he had approved. "Seize them," Tavik commanded, pointing at Marcus and Kira. "Seize the human and the traitor daughter. Loyal soldiers of the Vex Empire, do your duty." Several dozen guards moved forward, some loyal to Tavik, others uncertain about what they should do. The chamber became a tense standoff, everything balanced on a knife's edge. It was then that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward and raised his hand. "I challenge you, General Tavik," Marcus said, his voice ringing through the chamber. "Under ancient Vex law, I invoke the right of single combat. If I defeat you, General Tavik, then your conspiracy dies with you. If you defeat me, then the choice of whether to pursue peace or war belongs to you." The chamber fell completely silent. Everyone understood what Marcus was proposing. A human, challenging a Vex warrior of legendary power. It was a gesture that was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. General Tavik smiled, the expression of pure confidence and superiority. "Very well, human," he said. "Let me show you what a true warrior looks like." Supreme Commander Thorne looked at his daughter, then at Marcus. He raised his hand and declared the challenge valid under ancient Vex law. The ceremonial combat would proceed. The merchant vessel was old and unremarkable, the kind of ship that moved through space carrying routine cargo between distant stations. No one paid attention to such vessels. They were not impressive or important. They were invisible, and that was exactly what Marcus and Kira needed. They had boarded the ship using false identification documents that had been carefully prepared by diplomatic contacts who still believed in the peace. Kira wore a simple covering that concealed her distinctive crystalline features, though she could not hide her height or her fundamental alien nature. Marcus stayed close to her at all times, and together they occupied a small cargo cabin that had been cleared for their use. The journey to Vex Prime would take several days. With each passing hour, they moved deeper into Vex territory, closer to the heart of the civilization that Kira had been born into, but was now returning to as something almost like a fugitive. On the second day of travel, as they sat together in their small cabin, Kira began to struggle with the reality of what she was doing. She stared at her hands, the crystalline structures that marked her as Vex, as an enemy to many humans, as a traitor to many of her own people. "My father trusted me," she said quietly. "He chose me for this mission because he believed in me. And now I'm going behind his back, traveling in secret, putting myself in danger. What kind of daughter does that make me?" Marcus moved closer to her and took one of her hands gently in his. "It makes you a daughter who loves her father enough to save him from making a terrible mistake," he said. "General Tavik is manipulating people on your world, people who have power and influence. If we don't expose what he's doing, your father will be forced to make decisions based on lies. That's not betraying his trust. That's honoring it." Kira looked at him and he could see the conflict in her large eyes. She was a woman caught between two worlds, torn between loyalty to her birth civilization and loyalty to the man she had come to love. It was an impossible position, but Marcus could see that she was stronger than the weight of it. "You're right," she said finally. "My father taught me that the truth matters more than comfort. If I abandon that now, I betray everything he taught me." Over the next few days, as the ship traveled through space, Marcus and Kira spent hours talking about what they might face when they arrived on Vex Prime. They discussed strategy and contingencies. They talked about what they hoped to accomplish. But mostly, they talked about each other, sharing deeper parts of themselves than they had before. Kira told Marcus about her childhood on Vex Prime, about learning combat techniques from her father's officers, about the pressure she felt to be strong and unyielding at all times. She told him about the first time she had questioned whether her people's endless pursuit of military dominance was truly the right path. Marcus shared his own story. He had grown up in a military family, had been trained from childhood to think tactically and to see problems in terms of victory and defeat. But over the years, he had begun to wonder if there was more to strength than the ability to win battles. He had started to believe that true power might come from the ability to see the humanity in your enemy, to find common ground even with those who were supposed to be your opponents. "I think I was waiting for you," Marcus said one evening as they sat in the darkness of their cabin, watching the stars pass by the small porthole. "I was waiting for someone who could help me understand that peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of connection." Kira reached over and placed her forehead against his, a gesture that was Vex in origin, but that had become their own way of showing affection. In that moment, despite all the danger and uncertainty that lay ahead, they felt connected and certain of their purpose. The merchant vessel arrived at the outer stations of Vex Prime on the morning of the 5th day. They disembarked carefully, using the crowds of traders and workers to blend in and move unnoticed through the docking area. Kira had contacts among low-ranking military personnel, people who had worked under her father's command and still respected her, even if they didn't understand her choices. Through these contacts, they were able to obtain transport that took them deeper into Vex territory without drawing the attention of Tavek's agents. As they traveled through the Vex cities, Kira was struck by how much had changed and yet how much remained the same. The crystalline architecture still sparkled in the light of Vex Prime's sun. The streets were still filled with the distinctive sounds of Vex communication and commerce. But there was something different in the atmosphere, a tension and a sense of dread that had not been present before. General Tavek's propaganda had spread through the population like a virus. Everywhere, Vex citizens were talking about the threat posed by humans. They were speaking about betrayal and weakness. Marcus and Kira made their way to a safe location, a residence of one of Kira's trusted allies, a Vex official named Velak, who worked in the cultural ministry. Velak was shocked to see them arrive in secret, but she welcomed them without question. Over a meal of the strange crystalline foods that Vex people consumed, they explained what they had discovered about the conspiracy. Velak listened carefully and then shared her own concerns. "General Tavek has been meeting with members of the Supreme Commander's Council," she said. "He's been telling them that the peace treaty has weakened our defenses, that we're vulnerable to human invasion. He's been using the attempt on Kira's life as evidence that humans cannot be trusted. Many people are starting to believe him. We need to see my father," Kira said. "We need to tell him what we've discovered." "That will be difficult," Velak replied. "Tavek has been restricting access to the Supreme Commander. He's convinced him that there are human sympathizers in the government who might try to harm him or influence him with false information. Your father trusts very few people right now." Marcus listened carefully to this information, his tactical mind working through the problem. "Then we need to bypass Tavek's restrictions," he said. "We need to get to your father through official channels, through the government systems that Tavek can't completely control." "There's a Senate meeting scheduled for tomorrow," Velak said slowly. "The Supreme Commander will be present, along with other members of the government. If you could somehow gain access to that chamber, you might be able to present your evidence directly to the full leadership." "How would we gain access?" Kira asked. Velak was quiet for a long moment. "There is a way," she said finally, "but it will be extremely risky. I have credentials that would allow us to get you into the Senate building, but once you're inside, you would be exposed. If Tavek's agents discover you, they could move against you very quickly." Marcus and Kira exchanged glances. They both understood that this was the moment where fear could overwhelm them, where the rational part of their minds could convince them to retreat to safety. But they had not come all this way to hide or to abandon their mission. "We'll take the risk," Marcus said. "When is the Senate meeting?" "Tomorrow morning," Velak replied. "But you should rest tonight. You've had a long journey and you'll need your strength for what comes next." That night, lying in darkness beside Kira, Marcus felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. Tomorrow, they would walk into the heart of Vex government. Tomorrow, they would face General Tavek and try to expose his conspiracy before the entire Vex leadership. Tomorrow, everything would change. Kira reached over in the darkness and found his hand. They held on to each other, drawing strength from their connection, preparing themselves for the confrontation that lay ahead. 3 months had passed since Marcus and Kira's wedding, and their success had begun to inspire hope across both civilizations. The joint research facility was being constructed ahead of schedule. Trade agreements were being discussed. For the first time in 7 years, people on both sides whispered about a real future, without endless conflict. But not everyone wanted peace. In the depths of a military installation on Vex Prime, General Tavek sat in a darkened chamber with a small group of trusted officers. Tavek was a Vex of the Old Guard, a warrior who had spent his entire life preparing for battle. His crystalline exoskeleton bore the marks of countless fights, each scar a badge of honor. The peace treaty in his eyes was not an achievement. It was a betrayal. The female diplomat has grown soft, Tavek said, his voice like grinding stone. She has forgotten what it means to be Vex, and her new human husband has poisoned her mind. One of his officers, a younger warrior named Kesh, shifted uncomfortably. But sir, the people are beginning to believe in peace. Supply lines that were dedicated to the war effort are being redirected to civilian sectors. Recruitment for new soldiers has dropped significantly. Exactly, Tavek said, standing and walking to a window that overlooked the Vex cities below. Our civilization is becoming weak. This is precisely what the humans wanted. They could not defeat us in open combat, so they planted this female diplomat in our midst like a seed of infection. Tavek had spent years building his power base within the Vex military. He had allies in high places, and more importantly, he had access to resources. He had begun formulating a plan the moment the marriage was announced. If he could create an incident, something dramatic and terrifying that would convince the Vex population that the humans were not to be trusted, he could overturn the peace treaty and regain his influence. He had already begun reaching out to contacts on the human side, extremists who felt the same way he did. Across the vast distance of space, on a human colony world called Meridian 7, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Colonel David Graves, a human military officer who had spent years fighting the Vex, sat in a secure bunker with other officers who shared his views. They had watched with growing alarm as the peace treaty became more established, as resources once dedicated to military defense were redirected toward diplomatic missions and cultural exchanges. It's a trap, Graves said, his voice hard and certain. The Vex are using this marriage to lower our guard. They're learning our defensive strategies through the joint research facility. They're mapping our colonies through these trade missions. Any day now they'll strike and we won't be ready. One of his officers, a woman named Colonel Lisa Hayes, leaned forward. But sir, there's no evidence of any military buildup on the Vex side. Our intelligence reports show no unusual activity. That's what they want us to think, Graves replied. The lack of evidence is evidence itself. They're hiding it, and we need to do something about it before it's too late. What neither Tavek nor Graves knew was that they were actually working together, though they didn't realize it. Unknown intermediaries had been passing messages between them, coordinating their efforts. The conspiracy was becoming real. A web of people on both sides who wanted nothing more than to see the peace collapse so they could return to the familiar world of conflict. The first real sign that something was wrong came when Marcus received an encrypted message through the diplomatic channel. The message was brief and urgent. It contained intelligence reports about an assassination plot against Kira. According to the information, General Tavek was planning to have Kira killed during a public diplomatic tour of Meridian 7. Her death would be blamed on human extremists, creating an incident so severe that it would shatter the peace treaty beyond repair. Marcus's first instinct was to tell Kira not to go on the tour, to keep her safe behind protected walls. But he knew that if they showed fear, if they retreated into isolation, the conspiracy would have already won. Instead, he contacted her immediately and shared the intelligence with her. Kira listened calmly to what Marcus told her, but he could see the conflict in her large eyes. My father needs to know about this, she said. Agreed, Marcus replied. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We have to continue with the tour. We just need to be careful. The diplomatic tour of Meridian 7 proceeded as planned, but with significantly increased security. Marcus stayed by Kira's side at every moment, and they both moved carefully, aware that danger was lurking somewhere nearby. They visited research facilities, met with colonial administrators, and spoke to groups of humans and Vex colonists who had been living and working together on this frontier world. On the third day of the tour, as Kira was walking through a public market area, a shot rang out. A projectile came from a nearby building aimed directly at her, but Marcus had been watching, had been anticipating, and he pulled Kira down to the ground, shielding her with his body. The projectile passed over them and struck a wall behind them. Security forces immediately surrounded them and began pursuit of the shooter. Within minutes, they had captured the attacker. The person was human, but when they were interrogated, they revealed shocking information. They had been paid by Vex operatives working for General Tavek. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had initially realized. That evening, Marcus and Kira met with the Meridian 7 colonial administrator via secure communications. They also contacted their respective governments to report what they had discovered. The response was immediate and troubling. Reports began flooding in about unusual military activity. A Vex battle group that was supposed to be in a maintenance facility was now being mobilized for active duty. At the same time, human military forces were being recalled from peacekeeping missions and redirected toward defensive positions. Someone had escalated the situation, and the careful peace that Marcus and Kira had worked so hard to build was beginning to crumble. That night, alone in their temporary quarters on Meridian 7, Marcus and Kira sat together in silence for a long time. The weight of what they had discovered was pressing down on them. Tavek has declared his intentions publicly, Kira said finally, reading from a news feed on her communication device. He's announcing that he believes the peace treaty was a human deception. He's calling for the Vex military to mobilize for what he's calling a preemptive strike. Marcus felt a chill run through him. They had uncovered the conspiracy, but instead of stopping it, their exposure of the plot seemed to have accelerated it. General Tavek was no longer working in the shadows. He was acting openly now, using the momentum of the conspiracy to push the Vex Empire toward war. "We need to go to Vex Prime," Marcus said suddenly. "We need to confront this face to face. That's where Tavek's power base is," Kira replied, understanding the danger. "Going there means walking directly into the heart of the opposition." "I know," Marcus said. "But if we don't act now, if we let fear keep us in place, then the conspiracy wins. Tavek wins, and everything we've built toward will be destroyed." Kira looked at her husband, this human who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. She saw the determination in his face, the commitment to stopping this war before it truly began. She reached out and took his hand. "Then we go to Vex Prime together," she said. "We'll face whatever comes." They began making preparations immediately, arranging transport that would avoid military checkpoints and attracting the attention of Tavek's agents. As they packed their belongings and prepared to depart, both of them understood that they were stepping into a situation far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. But they also knew that it was necessary. The fate of peace itself hung in the balance. The Vex Empire had always been a civilization built on conflict. For 7 long years, they had fought against the United Terran Coalition in what many called the Cold War of the Stars. Ships fired on ships. Words became weapons. Trust became a luxury that neither side could afford. But on this particular day, something was about to change everything. Marcus stood in his quarters aboard the diplomatic station, looking out at the endless black of space. He was a decorated military officer, someone who had spent his entire adult life preparing for war. His uniform hung perfectly pressed on his chair. His medals caught the light that streamed through the window. He had been told he was chosen for a mission unlike any other, and he still wasn't entirely sure what that meant. The message had come through official channels just 3 weeks ago. The Vex Empire wanted peace, not the kind of peace that came from military victory, but the kind that came from connection. They proposed something unusual, something that seemed to belong in ancient history books rather than in a modern interstellar conflict. They wanted a diplomatic marriage. 2 people, 1 human and 1 Vex, bound together in matrimony as a symbol of unity and hope for both civilizations. The Vex had chosen their representative carefully. Her name was Kira, and she was the daughter of Supreme Commander Thorn, one of the most powerful leaders in the entire Vex Empire. She was also a skilled diplomat in her own right. trained from childhood to navigate the complex politics of her people. The human government had then selected Marcus, believing that his reputation for wisdom and tactical thinking made him the perfect choice to match her intelligence and capability. Marcus had accepted the assignment without hesitation. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. But as he waited in his quarters on the neutral space station, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt nervous. This wasn't about military strategy or combat tactics. This was about something entirely different. This was about connecting with another person, about building a bridge between two worlds that had done nothing but fight for so long. The wedding ceremony took place in the Great Hall of the station, a vast chamber where representatives from both civilizations gathered to witness history. Humans in their formal dress uniforms stood on one side, Vex warriors and officials, with their distinctive crystalline exoskeletons and piercing eyes, occupied the other. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a blade. Everyone understood what this marriage meant. If it failed, the war would continue. If it succeeded, it might spark a genuine peace. Marcus saw Kira for the first time as she entered the chamber. She was tall, perhaps 2 meters in height, with skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Her eyes were large and intelligent, taking in every detail of the human contingent before settling on Marcus. He could see her jaw tighten slightly just for a moment, before her expression became composed and formal once more. She was nervous too, he realized. They were both stepping into unknown territory. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Both sides had agreed to combine human and Vex traditions to create something that honored both cultures. Marcus spoke the human vows in a clear, steady voice. Kira responded in accented but perfectly proper English, her words deliberate and precise. When they exchanged the rings, their hands touched for the first time, and Marcus felt a strange sensation run through him. This was real. This marriage was actually happening. After the ceremony, they were escorted to their shared quarters. The room had been designed to be comfortable for both species, with areas that accommodated Vex biology and human needs. There was an awkward silence as the guards left them alone. Marcus gestured to the seating area and offered Kira something to drink. She accepted water and sat carefully, her movements precise and controlled. "This is unusual," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was melodic but carried undertones that were distinctly alien. "Very unusual," Marcus agreed. "But then again, the whole situation is unusual." They talked cautiously that first night, learning the basics about each other. Kira explained that her father had personally selected her for this mission because he believed in the possibility of peace, even though many in the Vex military opposed any treaty with humans. Marcus shared that he had spent his entire career in the military, but he had always believed that true strength came from understanding your enemy rather than simply destroying them. As the days passed, something began to shift between them. The formal conversations became less strained. Kira would ask Marcus about human customs and history, genuinely curious about the species she had been taught to view as inferior for so long. Marcus, in turn, listened carefully as Kira explained the ancient honor codes of the Vex, their complicated social structure, and the deep pride her people carried about their achievements and their warriors. They discovered that they both enjoyed strategic games. They played chess and found that they thought in similar patterns, anticipating moves several steps ahead. They both preferred simple, honest conversation to the endless political maneuvering that seemed to dominate diplomatic channels. They both wanted desperately for this peace to work. One evening, about 2 weeks after their wedding, Marcus and Kira sat together in the observation dome, watching the stars rotate slowly around them. Kira had never seen space from a human perspective before, and she was fascinated by how different it looked from Vex ships. There was something about the quiet, the vast emptiness that made the usual barriers between them feel less important. "My father asked me to make this work," Kira said softly. "He said that our people's future might depend on it." "My government said something similar to me," Marcus replied. "But I think we've moved beyond just following orders." "Yes," Kira said, and there was something like relief in her voice. "I believe we have." They reached an understanding that night that went beyond duty and obligation. They became partners in the truest sense, two people committed not just to the peace treaty they represented, but to building something real together. When they returned to their quarters, they held hands. And for the first time since the wedding, it felt natural rather than formal. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Kira worked together on several diplomatic initiatives. They negotiated the opening of a joint research facility, a symbol that their two civilizations could cooperate on matters of shared interest. They appeared together at public events, and gradually the humans and Vex who saw them began to believe that peace might actually be possible. If these two so different beings could find common ground, perhaps their entire civilizations could do the same. The early days of their union had been filled with uncertainty and careful distance. But as Part 1 came to a close, Marcus and Kira stood together as something more than just a political arrangement. They were partners. They were advocates for peace. And in a galaxy that had known nothing but conflict, they represented hope. Their marriage had begun as a political necessity, but it was becoming something far more valuable. It was becoming genuine,